You can chase power your whole life and never find it until you finally break. Kathryn Kuhlman didn't stumble into the miraculous by ambition or talent. She found it when she fell to her knees and whispered, "I have nothing left." That's where the Holy Spirit met her, not in her strength, but in her surrender. Because the fire doesn't fall on the proud, it falls on the desperate, the yielded, the ones who've stopped trying to impress heaven and have started begging for it. When you pray like that, when your voice trembles and your heart is open, the fire will come. You want the fire to fall. You want the heavens to break open and flood your soul with glory, don't you? But the fire doesn't fall where you think it will. It doesn't descend on the stage of pride or the polished performance or the voice that tries to impress. The fire has never honored ego. It seeks the low place. It looks for the heart that has come to the end of itself, the kind that stopped pretending, the kind that knows, I can't do this anymore. That's where it begins. That's where the Holy Spirit makes his throne, right in the middle of your brokenness. Kathryn Kuhlman, she wasn't made in a pulpit. She was broken on the floor. She didn't stumble into power. She fell into surrender. She knew that pride was a wall, and the Spirit wouldn't scale it. He waits until you knock it down, until every mask slips, until the applause of the crowd no longer feeds your soul. And you realize the only voice you need is the one that whispers in secret. You see, pride prays to be seen. Brokenness prays to survive. And heaven responds to that kind of desperation. Some people chase power like it's a trophy. But the Spirit, he's not a medal to be worn. He's a fire that chooses where to fall. And he falls where hearts are soft, where tears are real, where surrender isn't a speech, it's a groan. Kathryn never claimed to be mighty. In fact, she used to say, I've died 1,000 deaths. Do you know what she meant? She meant she let herself be emptied. She let her own plans crumble so something eternal could be born. She let the applause fade, the ambition dry up, and she knelt again and again because that's where the fire lives. Some people want a shortcut to the supernatural. They want the miracles, the signs, the crowds, but they skip the altar. They skip the death part. But there is no glory without the grave. The old self must be laid down, not hidden in a corner. It has to die so that something greater can rise. Kathryn understood that better than most. She didn't try to carry the fire. She became its resting place. And that only happens when your soul is stripped of pretense. There's a moment in every life where you face the fire without a filter, where no one's watching, where no title matters, where every good thing you've done suddenly feels hollow, and you ask yourself, is this all there is? That's the moment. That's where you dig a hole in the ground of your spirit and say, if you want to fall, I'm not standing in your way anymore. It's not about eloquence. It's not about knowing what to say. It's about becoming so desperate for him that even your silence becomes a prayer. Brokenness isn't pretty. It's not elegant. It's not made for the spotlight. But that's where the power is born. That's where heaven leans in. Kathryn knew that if you want to touch the fire, you have to stop holding yourself together. You have to let your hands tremble. Let your voice crack. Let the tears fall without wiping them away too quickly. You can't host the Holy Spirit while trying to impress him. You host him by making room, by being honest about how empty you are without him. She would walk on stage in beautiful gowns, yes. But if you look past the silk, past the elegance, you'd see a woman whose soul had been laid bare. She wasn't up there because of charisma. She was up there because she had been emptied, burned clean, and filled with something too holy to contain. People mistook it for performance, but those who knew, they knew. That was not Kathryn. That was a woman who had made peace with her weakness and let the fire fall in the ashes. You want to pray in a way that shakes the heavens. Start where it hurts. Start where you're tired. Start with the truth. The Spirit doesn't wait for your perfection. He waits for your surrender. He doesn't need your strength. He moves in your weakness. So stop trying to impress him with polished prayers and memorized lines. Talk to him like someone who can't breathe without him. Pray like you're drowning. Pray like the fire is the only thing that can save you, because it is. The power of prayer isn't in the words, it's in the posture. The posture of a heart on its knees, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. It's a heart that doesn't come demanding answers, but offering itself. Kathryn understood this. She didn't pray from the mountaintop. She prayed from the dust. And when the heavens saw that kind of posture, the fire came rushing down. Not to decorate her, but to consume her. And through her, the world was set ablaze. If you want that kind of fire, don't ask for more power. Ask to be broken in the right places. You think power is loud. You think heaven answers volume. You think the Spirit falls on the one who shouts the longest or dances the hardest. But Kathryn knew something different. She knew that the secret wasn't in noise. It was in stillness. Not the lazy kind of stillness. No, not apathy dressed as calm. But the fierce kind of stillness. The kind that waits. That lingers. That stays when everyone else has left. That kind of stillness makes the earth tremble. That kind of stillness makes the earth tremble. That kind of stillness makes fire fall. She called it tarrying, staying in the presence, remaining until something shifted, until the atmosphere bent, until the weight of heaven settled over the room like a blanket soaked in glory. She didn't rush it. She didn't treat the Holy Spirit like a vending machine, press the button, get the result. She lingered. She loved him enough to wait, loved him enough to stop everything else until he was ready to move. We've lost that now. We treat prayer like a checklist, a task to finish, a few lines, a couple requests, and we're gone. On to the next thing. We think time is more valuable than presence. We chase the schedule, but ignore the still, quiet invitation that says, stay a little longer. But Kathryn stayed when the lights were off. When the crowd was gone, when her own heart was unsure, she stayed, and that is where the power lived. The Spirit doesn't fall because you ask once. Sometimes you have to wait for him to come. Sometimes you have to sit in the silence and let it stretch, uncomfortable and raw, until the fire has room to descend. Most people leave too early. They walk out of the upper room before the sound of wind arrives. They pray, and when nothing moves, they assume God didn't hear. But Kathryn didn't believe in unanswered prayers. She believed in prayers that hadn't waited long enough. You want your room to shake? Then don't just speak, linger. Don't just ask, remain. Let silence become the offering. Let stillness be your altar. Because that's where the Spirit falls. He's not moved by your schedule. He's moved by your hunger. And hunger isn't proven in your willingness to wait. She would spend hours alone, not begging, not demanding, just whispering, I love you, and waiting, not filling the air with noise, just sitting in still surrender. And when the weight of his presence came, you could feel it. You could feel it in the hush, in the air, in the way people wept before a word was even spoken. That wasn't performance. That was a woman who had learned to stay until the heavens opened. That was a woman who knew, if you linger long enough, he will come. You see, power doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives on a whisper. Sometimes the room doesn't shake, but your soul does. Sometimes it's not fire you feel, but oil. Slow, heavy, holy. But you'll never know that if you rush it. You'll never know it if you treat prayer like a transaction. Kathryn knew the Spirit as a person. She treated him with reverence, tenderness, patience. She lingered, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that's the difference. That's where most people miss it. They're looking for the shortcut, the formula, the microwave miracle. We can't microwave the Spirit she wanted to. And that's the difference. That's where most people miss it. They're looking for the shortcut, the formula, the microwave miracle. But you can't microwave the Spirit. You can't put glory on a timer. If you want the fire, you have to be willing to stay in the dark, in the silence, long enough for your flesh to die and your spirit to rise. That's what tarrying does. It breaks your rhythm and teaches you to follow his. You want to pray like Kathryn did? Then learn to wait without watching the clock. Learn to love the silence, because the silence is where he speaks. Learn to stay when your emotions want to leave, when your mind says, this is taking too long. Learn to stay anyway. Because the moment you stop watching the door is the moment he walks through it. The fire doesn't fall for the rushed. It falls for the reverent. for the ones who stay with no guarantee, for the ones who burn with desire long before the flame arrives. That was Kathryn's secret. She didn't chase power, she lingered in love. And heaven always answers that kind of waiting. Always. Kathryn didn't just pray to the Holy Spirit, she spoke to him like a friend, like a lover, like someone whose presence was more necessary than breath. You could hear it in her voice, the way she said his name, soft and trembling, like it carried weight her soul couldn't quite carry on its own. She didn't treat the Spirit like a faraway power. She treated him like he was sitting right there in the room. Because to her, he was. There was no script in her relationship with him. No theatrics. Just intimacy. Deep, raw, sacred connection. That's where the fire came from. Not from shouting, not from emotion, but from affection. A holy, burning affection for the one she loved more than anything else. And the Spirit responded not like a force being summoned, but like a friend stepping into a room where he knew he was wanted. You see, we've been taught to pray with formulas. Say this, repeat that, don't forget the list. But Kathryn didn't follow formulas. She followed love. She followed longing. She followed that ache in her chest that said, I can't live without you. That's what opened the heavens. That's what made the atmosphere shift. That's what made rooms full of people crumble in tears before a word was even spoken. She carried intimacy, and that intimacy was irresistible to the Spirit. You can't fake that kind of connection. You can't mimic it, imitate it, or perform it. The Holy Spirit doesn't respond to performance. He responds to authenticity. And Kathryn gave him her whole self. Not just the polished version, not just the public version. She gave him her insecurities, her doubts, her loneliness. And in return, he gave her fire. When she walked on stage, people didn't just see a woman. They saw someone who had been with him, someone who had spent time in the inner place, who had worshipped when no one was watching, who had whispered, I love you in the dark when no one would clap or post about it later. That kind of private adoration bleeds into everything. You don't need to announce it. You don't even need to speak it. It radiates from your presence. That's what Kathryn carried, the afterglow of intimacy. She taught us something this world has forgotten. The Spirit doesn't fall where he's merely tolerated. He falls where he's loved, not with conditions, not with an agenda, but with open arms, open hands, and an open heart that says, you're enough, you're everything. That's the language of fire. That's the song that calls him near. And Kathryn sang it every day with her life. There's a difference between inviting the Spirit because you need a miracle and inviting him because you miss him, because you love him, because his presence is the reward, not the means to get one. When you speak to him that way, when you treat him not as power but as a person, you create space he longs to fill. The fire falls where it feels safe, where it feels wanted, where it feels at home. Kathryn made him a home in her heart, and he never stopped coming back. You want that kind of fire. Then speak to him like he's not just God, but your closest companion. Speak to him in the quiet moments, in the mundane. In the car, at the sink, in the grocery store aisle. Let him be part of the rhythm of your breath, not just the climax of your crisis. That's where real intimacy lives, in the little places, in the small, forgotten conversations that nobody else hears. Kathryn never rushed those moments. She would sit for hours in silence and then whisper his name like it was a melody. And he would come. Over and over he would come. Not because of the volume, but because of the reverence. Because he knew he was loved. Not used, not summoned, loved. When you begin to treat the Holy Spirit like the most important person in your life, he will begin to move like never before. Not just in church, but in your kitchen, in your bedroom, in the middle of a conversation, in the stillness of night, he'll come. He always comes where he's wanted deeply enough. Kathryn didn't just host revivals, she hosted him. And that's why the fire always fell. There's a sound that can't be rehearsed, a cry that doesn't come from the lips, but from somewhere deeper, far below the surface, past the polite prayers and the tidy words. Kathryn knew that sound. It wasn't loud for show, it wasn't performed for approval. It was born from the ache of the soul, the place where language ends and hunger begins. And that's where the Spirit met her, right there in that place, beyond words. She never tried to impress heaven. She just let heaven hear her need. And need has a sound, real need. The kind that bends your knees and breaks your voice. The kind that forgets who's watching, forgets how it looks, forgets everything but the ache for him. That's the cry that moves the throne. That's the sound that makes the fire fall. There were moments, intimate, trembling moments, where Kathryn would be standing on stage, surrounded by thousands, and yet the room would fall utterly silent. Not a hush of boredom, but a stillness that felt like breath was holding itself. And then, from the depths of her chest, something would rise, a cry, not a shout, not a chant, but a groan, a sigh soaked in yearning. And that one sound, just one, could bring a tidal wave of power across the entire room. You see, the fire doesn't fall because of cleverness, it falls because of connection. And some of the deepest connections don't need words. They're too raw for that, too sacred, too real. When your spirit is truly aligned with heaven, sometimes all you can do is weep. Sometimes all you can do is sit there with tears streaming down your face, unable to speak. And yet somehow, you know, he hears, he understands, because he always hears the cry beneath the cry. Kathryn didn't try to fill the silence with noise. She welcomed it. She leaned into it. She trusted that silence, too, could be sacred. That groaning, those wordless moments of spiritual desperation, carried a language all their own. It wasn't for man to understand. It was between her and him. And in those groans, the Spirit would respond. The air would thicken. The impossible would become possible. And nobody could deny it. The fire had fallen. We live in a world obsessed with articulation. We think if we can say it better, we'll see it faster. But Kathryn understood, sometimes you don't need better words. You just need honest surrender. You need to let your soul speak in the language of longing. The kind of prayer that isn't composed, but erupted. That's what shakes heaven. That's what draws the flame. She didn't teach people how to pray eloquently. She taught them how to pray authentically. How to let the tears fall and not wipe them away. How to let the heart groan without covering it with cliches. She gave people permission to be undone in the presence of God because she had lived that way herself. Undone, unfiltered, unashamed. That's the kind of prayer that births revival. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. Because it pierces the veil. Because it bypasses the head and floods from the heart. The cry of a heart that's had enough of the world. The cry of a heart that's had enough of the world. The cry of someone who can't fake it anymore. That's where the Holy Spirit meets you. That's where the flame comes. Some of you have been trying to impress heaven with your strength. You've been trying to hold it together when all he really wants is for you to break. Not because he wants to see you suffer, but because he wants you open, exposed, honest, real. The fire doesn't fall on what you pretend to be. It falls on who you truly are when no one is watching. Kathryn never faked that cry. It came from the miles she walked alone. From the night she wept until morning. From the aching realization that without him, she was nothing. That's what gave her authority. Not her voice, not her fame, her groan, her surrender, her ability to weep when others were too proud to break. And that cry, it still lives. It still works. It still opens the heavens and brings fire down to earth. But you have to be willing to go there. You have to be willing to pray past what you can control. Past your reputation, past your image. You have to risk the groan, risk the trembling voice, risk being seen in your need. Because when you do, when you pray like that, something happens. Not always immediately, not always dramatically, but always deeply. The kind of deep that shifts atmospheres. The kind that shakes your bones. The kind that says, heaven has heard and the flame is coming.